Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BFI's Film Academy August Lab. My name is Alex, and I'm the Film Academy Festival and Events Manager. And first of all, I want to apologize for this slight delay. We had some minor technical difficulties, as Noel told you in the chat, but hopefully they're all resolved now. So as you know, today's session will explore how to plan for and effectively incorporate action sequences into your short films. It's intended to give you, emerging directors and producers, a practical guide on how to infuse action in your short films, no matter what the genre. And today's session will be hosted by Mike Fury, who is the author of Life of Action, Interviews with the Men and Women of Action Cinema. And the event is presented by Action Xtreme, who are the first major acting studio in the UK. And Mike will introduce you to our very exciting guest today. But before I hand over to Mike, I want to just tell you a little bit about how the event today will be structured. And don't worry, we will still have the full 75 minutes despite this delay, the beauty of digital events. So we have some of our Film Academy team working behind the scenes today. My colleague Noel, who has introduced himself in the chat, is managing the chat box. So feel free to ask him. I know that some of you have just commented in the Q&A box that the chat is disabled. We'll enable it shortly. So please feel free to say hi and ask us any BFI, Film Academy, or labs related questions. And please make sure that you select everyone in your chat box so that everyone can see your message. Oh, Owen has commented, so I can see you guys are able to write in the chat now, which is great. Just if you're deciding to use chat, please be respectful of our guests today and also of each other. Please don't use offensive language, and please don't share personal information. And for those of you who've missed it, the link to our code of conduct can be found in the ticketing email you received from us. If you would like to network with each other, I know I said please don't share personal information, but we've set up a Facebook networking group just for that reason. And Noel will post the link to the Facebook networking group in the chat shortly. So please feel free to join that and interact there with each other, share the links to your work, or however you want to communicate with each other and find collaborators for your projects. If you have any questions for our guest today, so questions about action sequences in film, then those questions go into the Q&A box, please. And we'll devote the last 15 minutes of this session to your questions, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. And one final thing to say is that today's session is being recorded, and we'll be posting this recording on the BFI YouTube channel this week. So if you've missed anything, or if you want to watch the session again, don't worry, you will be able to. We'll be posting all over our social channels as soon as the recording is up. So that's it. And now I'll hand over to Mike. Enjoy the session.
Thanks so much, guys. And again, apologies for the slight delay, but really glad you're here with us. And thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to this special BFI Film Academy Lab session. As Alex mentioned, looking at how to incorporate action sequences into short films, and hopefully, helping your future work beyond that. As the guys mentioned, this event is presented by BFI Film Academy and Action Xtreme, the first action studio in the UK, with a remit to develop film, TV, and online content. My name is Mike Fury. I'm a journalist and author, and wrote 2 books called Life of Action, Volumes 1 and 2, which speaks to action actors, filmmakers, and stunt people from all over the world about their work and careers. So it's an area I'm very passionate about and have been immersed in for a very long time. So it's great to be here with you guys today. We're very lucky to have today's guest with us. He'll be sharing his experiences and journey right across the film business. And while I'll be starting the conversation, we'll make sure there's time for you guys watching to submit questions in the chat box on screen, and we'll answer as many as we can towards the end. So please do submit those. So without delay, our special guest is a legendary Hollywood stuntman, very highly regarded stunt coordinator and second unit director. His best known work includes doubling Chris Evans as Captain America in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He's also looked after the action design on Captain America Civil War, Avengers Infinity War and Endgame, Atomic Blonde, The Accountant, and The Mandalorian, to name just a few. And he's now made the shift into filmmaking. His feature directorial debut, Extraction, starring Chris Hemsworth, has been a huge success on Netflix. It's just an amazing feat of visceral, character-driven action cinema, so it's only right that a sequel is in the works, and has recently wrapped shooting. And we're extra lucky today because this man is deep in post-production right now on Extraction 2, and has been good enough to resurface and share some stories and wisdom with us today. So please welcome Mr. Sam Hargrave.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Sam. How are you doing today, Sam?
I am great. Thanks for asking. I apologize. There's technical difficulties. I'd say those are my fault. It's part of the living in the post production world. I've had to retreat to the parking lot. You can see now I'm coming to you live from the brick wall of my parking lot.
Yeah. No, thanks so much, Sam. It's great to have you with us. And before we jump back and hear about the journey that's brought you up to this point, I'm speaking to you at a really interesting moment where your first film was released. It was a huge success, and now you're at a pivotal stage editing the second movie. First off, did you expect Extraction to get the kind of reaction it received around the world?
I did not. I mean, you hope as a filmmaker, as a lover of the action genre, that when you are able to direct a movie like this, that people will appreciate it. But the overwhelming positive feedback from fans around the world was unexpected, because all of us are just kind of insecure kids at heart, right? Just trying to I hope people like me. I hope they like what we're doing. And so that with this film, it was fun to see that they did. And thusly, we're making a sequel, and hopefully you guys get to see that soon.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, we're all super excited for the next film. I'm very mindful you won't want to or nor be able to spoil anything, but just briefly, how has the shoot been for you, and how are you finding post-production this second time around?
I won't, no spoilers, you have to see the movie, but this movie was very, very challenging in that when you have a sequel to a movie that was successful on a certain platform, there are expectations that come with that, and your own expectations as a filmmaker to take that level of filmmaking and try to step it up. Because for me, the success, or my level of success, is I'm competing with myself. And so if I feel like I've told a better story, or I have gotten more creative action sequences, or whatever that may be, then I have succeeded. And so time will tell. Like, we're deep in post, trying to let the magic happen, or make the magic happen, as it were. So time will tell, but we're excited to deliver something that we feel is a step up from the first. And it was the second challenge was the kind of COVID environment. We had like a second wave of Omicron that hit, and we were very challenged by that. We had to move countries. We were set to film in Australia. We had it prepped. We had, we were 16, 17 weeks in. We had sets built. We had stages reserved. And on a Friday, I got the phone call and said, "Hey, we're leaving." I said, "We're leaving? Where are we going?" Like, "We're heading to Prague." Yeah. So we then had 12 weeks to re-prep, a huge action movie. And the amazing crew that we got there was able to do some really incredible things on short notice. And I think, truthfully, for the film, the palette is more suited to this environment, as you can see from this photo and some of the behind the scenes stuff that has been released. It's a very winter based show in Eastern Europe. And so being in Prague, being there was good for the look of the movie.
Sure. Wow, that's great. And since we have a lot of new and aspiring filmmakers watching, I just wanted to ask you, Sam, if we can go back and think which films inspired you as a child and teenager, and also when did that light bulb moment occur that this is an industry you would really want to work in?
Wow, that I would take my interest in film and television all the way back to, I was probably 5 years old when I was watching reruns of The Lone Ranger or Zorro, like these Disney shows that would be rerun, and my granddad would tape them on VHS and ship that to us. So I would watch these things, and I would emulate all of the action and things that I saw. And there's a video somewhere, I'll have to throw that online so people can check it out, of me with my hat, cowboy boots, mask, boots up to my thighs because I was so young, but reenacting a stunt that I saw. The Lone Ranger gets shot in the shoulder and he rolls down this hill. I would do that over and over and over again. For me, it was a little kid trying to do what he saw and was inspired by. Then it would, I led to my brother and sister and me. We would make short films, not really knowing what we were doing other than imitation. We were just trying to imitate what we saw. So we would make short films when I was probably 10 years old. And then that led to martial arts, which then led to Jackie Chan movies, Bruce Lee movies. And, that became my obsession, was martial arts and trying to become like those heroes that I saw. So some of the films that We got interactive here. We got a film truck leaving. It's trying to give you guys the real experience. What it's like. Never as glamorous as Hollywood's never as glamorous as it's gonna made out to be. It's always you find yourself sitting in a parking lot in post, talking to great people. Anywho, some of the movies that inspired me, which was your original question, were, I would say, any movie that Jackie Chan was ever in. That was his level of storytelling and comedy and action was something that I was inspired by. But I'd also say Rambo, the First Blood Part 2 was the first movie that I was exposed to that really inspired me to physical fitness was something that became a big part of my life. And that was seeing Sylvester Stallone all just jacked. I was like, oh man, I want to look like that. And so I got all these workout videos and got this Bowflex, I think was a big thing at that time. And so I started training. Mm-hmm. Wow. And you have to apologize for my friends are unaware that I'm in a film festival right now.
That's okay. But Sam, it's really interesting. I know that, physical fitness and martial arts has been a huge part of your life. I think we've actually got a nice quote here. If guys could share to the next slide, please. This is cool. I really like this. This is from the first live action book, which hopefully you'll recall. When I was 17, my Taekwondo instructor started making independent films and asked if I wanted to be an intern. So I got my first job working as a grip and then as a best boy in the electrical department. Most importantly, it was my first glimpse behind the scenes, which sparked a new interest and led to me signing up for film school. And that's really cool. And it's what I wanted to ask, what do you remember about this period as a teenager and having that first taste of being on set?
My memories were, what is this and how do I get more of it? Because it was, I grew up loving the TV shows that we talked about, watching these action movies, but not really understanding that it was a career. It was a process. A lot of different people came together with different jobs and worked on making this, and it was product, right? And so I was just like, oh, this is real life. Someone recorded all this. They just have really interesting lives. So when it was broken down as a process and I got to work behind the scenes as a grip and electrician, I started to go, wow, this is really fascinating. We're making dreams realities here. And so that's when I started, kind of the light bulb went off. I was talking to my mom about, what do I do? What am I going to do when I grow up? I was like, should I be a psychologist? Should I be a writer? And she's like, well, it seems like you're really interested in this film stuff. And so I pursued a not career yet, but like a further education in film and trying to understand more of how it was done and I wanted to do it all, right? Jackie Chan to me was the ultimate inspiration. He was a stuntman. He wrote, directed, edited. He did it all, acted. And so that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to have all of those skills to tell stories, especially action related stories. And, so that was my working behind the scenes on these films that I was able to intern on, gave me a glimpse into the behind the camera that I was so unknowingly intrigued by. And that was the beginning of the end, so to speak.
That's great. And it's really cool, and interesting that in film and TV, people do come from completely different backgrounds. And it can be an academic one or training on the job. And obviously in action and martial arts movies, a lot of people come from performance or martial arts background. Although you did train in martial arts, you also studied, as we see there, and you just mentioned. Could you tell us a bit about the course you took and what you feel you gained from that at that young age?
Yeah, at that, I started working on films when I was 17, 18. And then when I went to university, I had to, you get obviously all your electives out of the way, but then, or the normal ones, you got to do English, math. But then when I zeroed in on filmmaking, it was, there was a series of classes that I remember. And the first one was you had to tell a story in pictures. So you had a camera, a still camera. You had to go out and tell a narrative with still photos. And I decided I had these, they were all boxed away in the attic, from being a kid. I had these Playmobil action figures I was all into Westerns in the day. So I had all these. So I set up this diorama or whatever you want to call it of these, went out in the woods and set up the scene. And I took photos and was just completely absorbed in this telling of the story that I was creating with these figures. And that kind of unlocked something. And then it was obviously you graduate to moving pictures and you tell a chase story, or you tell, whatever. And it was those opportunities for growth that allowed me to test the waters, if you will. And this is kind of how I have lived my life and continue to, for better or worse. It's just the way I do it. Is usually I dive in head first and then check the depth of the water after. Meaning we would do these scenes, and I would get, you'd look at it and go, something's not working. And then I would go to class the next day and they talk about, the rules of crossing the line, or the golden rule of thirds. So all these kind of important elements of making movies and the philosophy behind them, that I'd be like, oh, so that's why it didn't work. It's like we jumped the line. It's two guys in the scene are looking in the same screen direction, so it doesn't make sense to the human eye. So we would do all these things and make mistakes. And it was through doing and making mistakes that I learned the most significant lessons in film and, in my life.
Sure. No, that's great. And next slide, please, to the team. We've got, you famously started out as a stuntman, which we talked about before moving into choreographing the action. And this is obviously just a small selection of films you've talked about being important to you, or were pivotal in your career. And obviously, I'd love to do a deep dive into all of these and many more, but we don't have time. But just to highlight a few, and I wanted to start with The Host, which I believe we talked about before as being one of your first major coordinating jobs. And you said initially you found coordinating more stressful than performing the stunts yourself, because you feel there's a responsibility in a way, working with other people and putting them in the compromising position. But then equally you approached it like a filmmaker, with close collaboration between the departments to make sure everything's done correctly. And interested to ask, did this process alleviate any stress that you would have had? And is it an approach that you've taken ever since, working very closely with your entire team?
Yeah, that's a great question. Great kind of topic. I still, whenever you're in charge, so to speak, have the opportunity and the ability to be leading people in a direction, it can be very stressful. Now, different people deal with that in different ways, but it's still stressful nonetheless. And for me, when it came to performing stunts, it was me. Yes, there were other people involved. If you're doing a fight scene, you're not doing it alone, but there was a limited amount that you had to focus on, and that was the performance. You had to focus on you being prepared, and then on your partners and what they had to do. And so it was simpler, so to speak. Then when you're now in charge of not just this fight scene, but the other fight scene, and you're in charge of this car crash and that safety, and you have to communicate what's going to happen to other departments. And now you're also in charge of the budget. You're in charge of, you're fiscally responsible. The pressures increase. And so what didn't change is the kind of the approach of preparation. So the more information that you have, the more prepared you are, you're more able to handle that stress in a positive way. You're still going to feel the stress. You're still going to have the concerns, but the more information you have, the more prepared you are, the easier it is to get through that. And so we had an adage that we would put up on the board in the office, whatever show I was on. It was the opposite of sometimes a phrase that gets used as, fix it in post. If you've been around film, you've heard that. We switched that and said, fix it in prep. Meaning, if you be as prepared as possible when you're coming to set to do your job, and that way you alleviate a lot of that stress, knowing you've been through this before. You've pushed yourself in practice, in rehearsal, so that when you get there, the stressors that will come up, because it will happen, you will be, aha, that's familiar. We've planned for this scenario. Let's adapt and overcome. And so then taking that from the performance level to the coordinating level and then directing, now you're in charge of the entire film, all the departments. And so again, preparation is key. So the more prepared you are, the better you can lead. And so it's the process has been very similar. It just, the pressure and stress increases the higher up you go. Usually people say, oh, I want to get to that place so I don't have to do as much. It doesn't really work that way. The higher you go, the more responsibility you have, the greater the pressure, the greater the stress. And then it's just a matter of dealing with that through preparation.
Sure. And want to talk about Marvel, of course, which is a huge part of your career. And you've made many films in the MCU, and really interesting career trajectory where you've gone from being a stuntman to choreographing and second unit directing. And how has that journey been for you, and being such a part of an iconic franchise and having that opportunity, in a sense, to evolve yourself at the same time?
Working in the Marvel Universe one was a dream come true, but two was an unbelievable opportunity for growth. I got to work with some of the most amazing stunt performers, action directors, filmmakers, in front and behind the camera, some of the most talented actors of our generation, and directors, I think. So there was a kind of a I don't want to say fortuitous, but a very interesting path that I took, kind of a circular journey, where I started doubling Chris Evans as Captain America on the first Avengers movie that Joss Whedon directed back in 2011. We shot it, came out in 2012. But I remember that is kind of my first foray into the Marvel universe, and it was amazing. Nobody knew at the time how successful it was going to be, that movie would gross over $1 billion, and that you'd go on to many more, because it was, I think every character had their own movie. Not every character had. Iron Man, Cap, Thor, I think, had a movie, and then it was Avengers, so that you brought them all together. And so it was new. It was in a fledgling moment, it was a growth moment. And so we thought we had something special, but you never know until the fans speak, and then when they spoke, you're like, this is huge. And so that was from the kind of the experiential side of knowing that you were involved in something special. But then more granularly, being on the floor, as it were, performing, I got to push myself and do some stunts that I had always wanted to do but never maybe gotten to do. I got to then move up from doubling to stunt coordinating, when I got to coordinate Captain America Civil War with the Russo brothers. And so that came with it a lot of pressure, because now you've seen the Marvel movies that have come before, and by this time 4 or 5 years after the first Avengers movie, you've seen how successful they all are, and the expectations that you put on yourself, that audiences put on these films, it starts to grow and the pressure grows. So you're like, oh, how are we going to deliver? And you just had to, for me, I just had to kind of go back, meaning understand that I am still a fan of action. And so if I'm first and foremost focusing on what it is that I want to see as a fan, then I'm trusting that, like other fans out there, my taste level is kind of in line with them and what they're going to enjoy. Sure. So that was the challenge as the action designer. And then when you get to direct some of those movies, like actually directing those big actors during these action sequences, I got to second unit direct on Infinity War and Endgame. And being, that level of involvement was a whole new ball of wax to lay out. And then you get to mold some incredible performances. You get to, have a little bit of say in what is shot and how it's shot. But you're still reminded of like this, you're surrounded by such an amazing team. And it's not like, oh, Sam, he's responsible for the action in those movies. Sam is one small part in a huge machine that hopefully I've had some influence on in a positive way. And hopefully fans have enjoyed those movies, because I sure enjoyed working on them.
Absolutely. And want to talk also about The Mandalorian, which has obviously been a hugely popular show with fans. And when you're directing the second unit, or the action unit, for those who aren't familiar with the way second unit works, as you did on season 2, and working within that much loved universe, how much do you generally stick to the traditional Star Wars formula versus experimenting with new ideas and innovations and that you might want to bring to the sequences?
There's a balance, but the Mandalorian series was one of the first season was very original and very fun. It was an honor to be a part of the first 2 seasons. But you're faced with, again, an opportunity to hopefully infuse the franchise with a little bit of yourself, your own style, but also you do have a canon that you must be true to, because there's fans all over the world who have an expectation of who these characters are, a knowledge of what has transpired much greater than my own. I mean, as much research as I want to do, I'm admittedly not living that life, living, breathing the Star Wars universe as much as others. So there's a pressure to deliver what they want, while saying, hey, how can we make it just a little bit different? How can we make it a little bit special, stand out a little bit? And I think, hiring the right people, being surrounded by those who understand the process better than you do is very important. So a lot of the people I'm looking for are Star Wars people, meaning those who understand this lore, who know if I say, I make a suggestion that I think would be creative, they can stop me and say, that doesn't quite line up with what fans might expect. And then I get to go a different way and subvert their expectations in a different way that's a little less offensive to the fans.
Sure. And the next slide, please, guys. If we could go to the a nice quote from Sam here, but talking about safety. You said, I treat every single stunt like it's a big deal. Often it's the little ones that will get you and cause an injury because it doesn't seem like a big deal, or you haven't got much time and think it'll be quick and easy, so you don't approach it the right way. And this is really relevant for new filmmakers hoping to incorporate action into their short films. And of course, there's many different types of action. I'm sure Sam will agree that you definitely shouldn't be trying to do car stunts or anything crazy and dangerous if you don't have experienced or qualified people to help you. However, you can safely put together simple fight scenes or maybe chases on foot, that kind of thing, to raise the stakes dramatically. So Sam, could you speak to how important safety and the right preparation has been in your career?
Safety is paramount. You can quote me on that one. Like there's, as much as stunts is about pushing our limits, both physically and the limits of what's come before us in cinema. At the end of the day, we all have families and loved ones we need to get home to, and there's a life outside of this that is very important. And we have to realize that we are creating make believe, like our own version of reality. But we have to do so in a manner that is safe and gets everybody home to their loved ones at night. So that's always been a huge thing for me. Even watching, and I know I came from the era that inspired me, of the Hong Kong action cinema of the 80s and 90s, where they pushed the limits of safety beyond what was possible and probably advisable. But there were still elements when you watch a lot of those behind the scenes stuff from them they weren't careless. Like we take risks, but they're calculated risks, right? I never, like I'm going to be the first person to say, know the shot. This is by part of, I think, knowing action is knowing filmmaking. So if you know the shot, and you, for example, someone is going to fall down, I'm going to use my background as an example. You're going to fall, and you're going to fall out of frame, and you're not going to see the ground. Then this would be the first place I would put a stunt pad. So if I fall out of frame, you can't see down here. And so that safety used in that way can aid the magic. We would now, with one of my favorite parts of the improvement of CGI through the years has been safety. So now, we can put stunt mats on the ground that look like the concrete, and you can take a fall that is like, oh, it's cringe inducing. And you put the sound effect and it looks like, oh man, that guy really hurt themselves. But they get up, brush it off, because now you're not hitting the hard pavement, you're hitting a soft foam pad. And so now you have longevity. So rather than getting into your later years and you're walking around with a bunch of broken bones, hopefully with these safety improvements, you can now be walking around and feeling good and have graduate to stunt coordinating and second unit directing and have less and less injuries as the safety improves. But then, ironically, the flip side of that is with these, as we go on, audiences expect more and they want more. And so now you have to push it further, but you still always have to remember safety first. Everybody needs to go home safe at the end of the day, their families, and to live the rest of their lives. So whatever you can do to enhance the excitement while still remaining true to safety is safety first. Go for it. Just think everything through. And part of that quote, I guess, is what I meant by that is sometimes we take for granted things that we would normally do every day. Like the time I blew out my knee was, well, the one time out of multiple, but it was because I put a mat down and assumed that, because I've fallen on mats all the time, you relax your state of awareness, and you're like, oh, there's a mat down, and so I think it's something else, or I'll focus on this other thing. When you have to focus on all the aspects, even if there's a stunt mat down there, you have to focus on how you're falling, the body control. And so I got complacent, and I took for granted the mat being there, and I hurt myself seriously. So, even the little ones, treat them as big meaning, put all the same care and preparation into the simplest thing as you do to the most complicated, because how you do anything is how you do everything.
Sure, sure. And on the next slide, I think we're going to get a really interesting, nice behind the scenes pictures of your good self as well. And I mean, I find it, yeah, it's really fascinating and actually super inspiring that whilst being on this amazing career path, like a decade or more ago, and you're super busy as a stuntman at that stage, you were still making short films in your free time and going away and writing and directing, and which of course is hugely important and set you on the path to where you are today. Just interested to ask, looking back, what was the experience like stepping off, for example, a Marvel set and then going to direct your own low budget short film in that kind of contrast?
Well, you quickly realize that making movies is, and this would be both inspirational and frustrating for those, you know, just starting out, is it's very similar. The difference is you have more money, more problems. you have more ability with money and with the time to create bigger worlds, or you get bigger toys, so you can do bigger stunts, so you can do bigger sequences. But that doesn't mean that you don't have the same frustrations, the same limitations, because just as you as a short filmmaker, we'd be fighting the sun and being stressed over, oh gosh, we only have 3 more hours to get the shot. Whether your movie is 150 million or it's $50, you have the same 12 hours in the day. So you have the same stresses, and just the difference now is when it's you and your 10 friends, and it's $50 and a couple boxes of pizza on the line. The difference is now it's a $150 million movie. You have an actor who's being paid, when you break it down, probably being paid $1 million a minute. And now you're racing the sun. So the stakes have just increased, but you're still fighting the same things. But like, you come out and you're like, you'd be on a movie on a Marvel set, and you would think, you're like, what? For some reason, you're like, you would assume that the trains would stop or traffic would just yield to you, but nah. You shoot near a train track. They don't really care that you're making a movie. It could be however much money you got. Chris Hemsworth there, Chris Evans, they don't care. Like, trains got to go through. Life goes on, and so you're waiting for the train. You're like, yep, same situation. So part of it is really humbling when you get there, because you assume it's gonna be so different. It's like, thank God, it's gonna be different when I get there. When I'm directing these movies, it'll be different. It's different because there's so many more people, there's so much more money, but the feelings are very similar. And so in saying that, pay attention to all of the things, the feelings that you have when you're making these short films, and all of those challenges, the lessons you learn, because they will be helpful when you step up the ladder to the next level.
Sure. And it's really interesting to say as well, on some of your shorts, you had a very small crew, as you mentioned, but you were doing many of the jobs yourself, like operating the camera, doing the lighting and sound and all these things. In hindsight, do you think this helped you appreciate all the different departments on set?
Very much so. A lot. There were 3 short films that I made with the woman I was dating at the time that were just the 2 of us. We were just 2 people. And I'd like to say that was a plan. That was what we were trying to do, to like, we're going to push ourselves and just try to learn as much as we can. Truthfully, we didn't have friends willing to help us. So we were like, we have to do it, because we were trying to do just one practice fight scene in on location, and everyone's like, it's the weekend. Do you really want to work on the weekend? We just spent a whole 5 days busting our bodies for this movie. And I was like, yeah, I do. I want to keep doing more. And it was just the 2 of us. And so then you're challenged with, how do I execute my vision with very few resources? And then you get creative, and sometimes there's great freedom in constraint, actually, because now you can't think of like all the ways that you could do it or all the ways you should do it. There's only a couple ways that are actually possible. What's the most creative and effective way to get this shot with what you have? And so then you're forced to learn all these things. And the appreciation, as you mentioned, goes through the roof, because when you have to actually check the sound levels while remembering the continuity of costume. That was a big one that we got. Spent an entire day on one of those short films with my shirt inside out. And it not only was it inside out, it was a different color on the inside. And we were just like on day 3, and we were, thinking about so many different things. You shoot it all, and you go back and didn't look at the dailies and realize it was finished, wrapped for the day. You sit down and you go, that's actually a completely different color than did we just do that? And so now you go, wow, that's why script supervisors exist. And so you take just one level of stress off of the director. And man, to this day, my appreciation for a good script supervisor is unparalleled, because I've been there and I've made those mistakes. And I think that's to me, has been the most important thing in my learning process, is making mistakes. Not that I'm saying it's good, you should always make mistakes. I mean, you try to do it right, but you will make mistakes. You will stumble, you will fall. Rather than saying, like I made a mistake and getting down on yourself, say, I made a mistake, but what did I learn from this? How can I do it differently next time? And as long as you're learning from those mistakes, then you are well on your way to being successful at whatever it is that you're doing.
Sure. And of course, we need to talk about Extraction, which is a fantastic film. I loved it first time around, rewatched it very recently, and I'm sure everyone here has seen it. If you haven't for any reason, I strongly encourage you to go to Netflix now and watch it immediately after this. And I think we've got still on the next slide as well, for the film. And just really, it's just such a great film for action fans. It's absolutely what you want. We just wanted to ask Sam, what was the background to making the first film, and why did you choose that one in particular as your directorial debut?
Yeah, great question. The little bit of backstory on this one, it's actually a film or a story that's been around for many years. I first read the script when it was proposed that Chad Stahelski and David Leitch would direct that, before they directed John Wick. So it's been around for a long time. It had a different title at the time, and I think Russell Crowe was attached to starring or something. And so it was around, and then it went away. They did John Wick. I did a bunch of other things, and then it came back when I was on Avengers Infinity War. I had met the Russo brothers, Joe and Anthony Russo, in 2013 when we were shooting Captain America: Winter Soldier, and we hit it off. They appreciated, I guess, my hard work and understanding of the filmmaking process. They asked me to coordinate Civil War. Again, we got on. I guess I did a decent job. They asked me to come back. And then on Infinity War, we were talking about what my future was. What did I want to do? And I mentioned that I was going to direct movies, and I didn't want to just direct action or just work in the stunt department. I wanted to tell stories. And they were like, they said, "Oh, okay, really?" I said, "Really?" And I'll do it too. And that's something, just a quick aside, is I think it's important that's how I got my first second unit directing job as well, is it's important to put yourself out there. That in this business, especially, we all fear rejection. We fear not being ready, feel not being good enough. But when you have the experience and you have the confidence and you feel, you know what, I'm ready to take that step, you have to take that step. You have to put yourself out there. And then for me, in 2014, we were sitting with Gavin O'Connor as we were writing action sequences for The Accountant. And he at the time, I was just the stunt coordinator of that show. It was a nice near miss. We planned that. It's a good time. Now you're on the edge of your seats. We were planned on the coordinating the show, and we strangely, not strangely, because we had used that skill. My buddy Fernando and I, we would write action sequences for movies for directors, because everybody understands the script, right? So how we would kind of get in. And so we're writing these scenes, and a piece of paper comes across the desk, and Gavin says, what names on this list do you like for second unit director on this movie? And, the action director. So I looked at the list and I said, I don't see my name on this list. And he kind of chuckled. He's like, "Are you serious, Bubs?" And I said, "Yeah, I am serious, because I feel like I know all these names and they're great, but I feel like I could do just as good as them. And I know your style. I know the movie. We've been writing this thing. Give me a shot." And to his credit, he did. And that was my first second unit directing job. But I never would have been given that job. Like I put myself out there, and he could have said no, and I didn't have it. But worst case, I mean, the answer is always no if you never ask. And so it's important to put yourself out there. So same story when I was on Infinity War, and I said I was going to direct movies, and then Joe Russo came to me a couple weeks later, and he said, "Hey, I have a script that I think would be a great first movie for you." And so I read it, and I said, "This seems very familiar." And I recognized the movie, and he said, "Yeah, I've been trying to get it made forever. We just need a star." So then we were both sitting there looking across the field at one Chris Hemsworth, and we were kind of like, he might make an appropriate star for this movie. And he's been looking for something outside of the Marvel universe for a while. So approached him and said, "Hey, what do you think?" He read the script. He said, "It sounds awesome." And it was strangely as simple as that. It wasn't so much, and it's, when I talk about it and people hear about it, it's like, what, like that? Yeah, it wasn't as if, I know, and I'm going through right now with a bunch of different movies of development, right? Like you have an idea and you had to go through development, and some of the shows have been trying to get going for 5 years and nothing's happened. But this story, this extraction story, Joe wrote it in, I think, 2009, and it didn't get made until 10 years later. It didn't, the audiences, the world didn't get to see it for 11 years after the idea came. So two things in that. One is, if you have an idea, believe in your idea and just keep going, keep pushing. Sometimes it takes a long time for that to happen. And then the other is, opportunity. I guess they say luck is when opportunity and preparation kind of, meet. And so at that time, yeah, I was looking for a movie. I was directing second unit. I was prepared. I was writing. I was doing things that were focused on storytelling. So that was my preparation. And then the opportunity came in the form of, Joe Russo, talking to Joe Russo and putting myself out there saying I wanted to direct, him having an available, IP or intellectual property that I could direct. And that's how it started. It was very serendipitous and a very smooth, transition, but it was very unexpected. That's not where, my mind was at the time, because I was like, oh, you got to write this thing and you got to grind and make it happen. And that was my path. But then this thing came in front of me and I said, yes, I would love to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, being a director and working with all the other departments, how do you work with your colleagues? Do you have a strong sense of what you want in a scene, or do you take a more flexible approach as a filmmaker in terms of letting people experiment and try out different things?
It really depends. I try to be a very collaborative filmmaker, and I try to, as a director, you're kind of like the manager. There's a very my style, I guess, because you can have very filmmakers who, like, all right, they draw it out themselves. They've written it, they draw it out themselves. Like Spielberg was that way. He was very much to the boards. Like trying to think of Andrew Nichols was that way when I worked with him on The Host. He wrote the script, he had the boards, he was very like, this is the shot, this is the only way to tell the story. I'm a little more, and part of this might be because of my background with second unit and working with other people to realize their vision, is I like to kind of adhere to the adage that I learned from Joe Russo, is the best idea always wins. And sometimes that best idea doesn't come from me. Like if I'm working with the stunt team, like a lot of the best moments in the Marvel universe, when they weren't for me, I might have been in charge of that department, but I hired great people and they would be like, oh, what if we did this? And it's my job to recognize the good idea and then implement it. And then, annoyingly, sometimes you get the credit, and if you try to, like, this guy's idea or this woman's idea, because a lot of times it really isn't always the filmmaker who's like, this is the way it has to go.
Sure.
So I'm very collaborative. I try to hire great creative people and then work with them. I have an idea. My job is to have the through line. Like, I know what the story wants to be, and then I need to fight for that. And if there's a certain piece of action that I really want to see this happen, I'll say, hey, I want to get this in there. But around that, I like to give people some creative freedom to express themselves, because it is a collaborative art. And I'm really thankful that I worked with people like, David Leitch and Chad Stahelski and the Russo brothers, who would allow me the freedom to create. They would say, this is the kind of action scene that we're looking for. Go do your thing. And then I would, and then come back, and you'd have to change and adapt. And at the end of the day, it's their story. But allowing people the freedom to be involved and have ownership is very rewarding. And, and part of that is just making sure you communicate early, so you're on the same page. This is what I'm looking for. And then, let good people do their thing. And a lot of times that's when the best product comes out. Sure.
And if we go to the next slide, please, guys, I want to talk about a memorable and very special sequence in the first movie that everyone will know exactly what we're talking about. So to give context for everybody, within several large set pieces, great action sequences, and there's several of them. There's one truly epic, continuous, nail-biting sequence. It's actually, I believe, 11 minutes, 29 seconds, but we rounded up there for 12 minutes. But you know, Sam, you've spoken in many interviews about how much time and preparation went into that sequence. Could you give us a summary of not just the prep work involved, but how you wanted that sequence to serve the story and character, and how you wanted that to be a driving force behind the action, not just action for the sake of it?
Yeah, yeah. That's that story is actually really funny, because that was as much a creative um, improvisation as for problem solving as it was like, this is how the story has to be told. Because I read the script, and that scene read as just an insane action sequence to rival anything from any Bond movie, any Bourne movie. But then I looked at our shoot days, and I looked at, our second unit, which at the time, which was 0. And I was like, let's do the math here. Like, in my experience, that sequence for a second unit would take them 3 weeks to do, just on the page. And you'd sprinkle in 5 to 10 main unit days. Okay, so you've got now 5 and 50, you got 25 days for this one sequence, and I have 55 days to shoot the whole movie. So I'm like, well, that doesn't add up. So how can we do this in a more effective, efficient way? And so it started then like, all right, and truthfully, a little bit selfishly, how do I keep ownership of the action with me rather than giving it to some second unit? I was like, well, what if we just had Chris do as much as possible, and we just did it in like a oneer? And then at first it was like, no, it's impossible. You can't do that. It's a terrible idea. And I was like, well, so long as we agree that we can tell the necessary story, as long as we can hit those important story beats, those character moments, I think it will be the way to do it. So we did. I guess that spark of an idea was 4 months before we shot it. So then it's 4 months. You start working with the script, putting in your beats, start working with the storyboard artist, tell the stunt team, you're like, all right, this is what I'm thinking. They start working on ideas. Now you're looking at locations, like, all right, how does this tie together? And you just start molding this sequence. Always remembering, like, all right, what's the story? What are we trying to say here? What are we trying to tell? How can we make it move the character along, move the story along in a compelling way? And that was how it was born. And it was so not so much of like me saying, I'm going to do a 11-minute sequence with cuts you cannot see. I was like, no, how do I have the time to put this action sequence on screen and make it different? Because I knew with the money we had as well at the time, we weren't going to be able to compete with James Bond. They have $200 million to do their things, and that's not. So don't just play a different game. Mm-hmm. Don't try to out Bond because you will lose. How do you make that? How do you take ownership of that action sequence and do something, just slightly left of center or right of center, just a little bit off? What's your perspective on the action? And that would be kind of a takeaway from this is when you're doing your films, what is your voice? Now you might not know that immediately. Like I've been doing this for long enough now I'm starting to understand what I think my voice is, which is, crazy to say that I've been doing it for this long. But so it takes time. Yeah. Some of you might already have your voice and know exactly what you want. It took me a lot longer. It's still taking me. So it's having the, courage to try things that develop your voice, because that's what's going to make your films unique and interesting. And that's when I watch a movie, what I appreciate is not just like it's a bunch of explosions, a bunch of stuff. You're like, what's the point of view? Who do I see? What filmmaker's voice do I hear when I'm viewing this? I think that's what makes cinema interesting. You find that a different point of view. That's why people, I think, appreciated that about the movie. Is they go, oh, that's a unique point of view. I've seen a lot of action before, but maybe not exactly like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting bringing your unique background to the mix. We should say that on some of the car chase sequences, you were, I believe, strapped to a vehicle with a camera rig, which is safe to say not many directors would do that. How did you come up with the idea of doing that? And was there anybody actually that was reluctant for you to do that for safety reasons?
Oh man, again, a lot of it came down to, well, two things most importantly. The reason I wanted to operate the camera for that whole sequence was I felt like time and money were the things we were fighting against. And every time you have to communicate something and it comes back, like that's twice as long as it takes to get the thing done. So rather than having to communicate with the camera operator exactly what I wanted to see, I was like, let's just eliminate one of those back and forths, and I'll just do it to the best of my ability of what I want to see. And I've operated for many years, not on big movies, but shooting these previses and these concept videos and short films. So I had a very, very good feel for action. And a lot of it, I felt that you could save a take by instinctively going where you need to go, having known action, rather than going here and saying, you know what, like this is my mark, and you were over that, you're in the wrong place. Is you start to feel the fight going that way, and now you're watching the monitor, but you're seeing like, I know where this is going. I see where his body's lined up. He's not going to land there. I have to adapt, and there I am. Mm-hmm. And now and it works, and it has a certain chaos and organic beauty to it that if you just buy the books and hit your mark, and it doesn't have the same feel. So that was one, just like rather than have to communicate, just go straight to my mind, from my mind to the camera and to the audience. And then the other was safety, because a lot of the places I wanted to put the camera for the style I was going for, which was handheld throughout, like I didn't want to use a camera car rig which has a stabilized head that's very smooth and has a distinct style, which is very valid and beautiful. It's just for this sequence I wanted to try something different. And so the only way to achieve that sometimes was jumping from a rooftop to rooftop, or strapping myself to the front of a car. And we tried different vehicles, but that's part of the rehearsal process and preparation. Is the reason for that one particular instance you're speaking of is we couldn't, with the camera vehicle we created, which had these safety things, and we couldn't achieve the slide that we needed because it had a long wheelbase and these big tires that were grabbing. It was actually more dangerous that it could roll over. So to keep up with this car, we got a short little, speedster, a little street car that was souped up so it could slide corners. And the only place, and with the time we had, was me on the hood, strapped in with these two, safety straps. And that was the most effective way to get the shot. But rather than put a camera operator in that position, who, if something went wrong, might not know how to tuck their body and roll, or might not have that sixth sense of this, we're getting too close, I have to adapt. I've just been doing that for such a long time that it becomes a little bit instinctive of how to get out of sticky situations that could be dangerous. And so I was like, you know what, I would feel responsible for someone getting hurt. So I put myself in that position. And truthfully, it sounds terrible, but at least in that, directors are, in this process, they're important. Sure, they have the vision, but once you've planned it all out, and once you have, you've talked to your people, they can, because this happened on the second movie. I got, I went down with COVID for 5 days. They kept shooting. I would, I had a monitor in my room, and I'd check in, but they knew, my first AD knew, my DP knew what was going on. The actors knew, we'd all rehearsed it. So it's at that point, if I go down with an injury, they can execute until I get better. So I felt like it was the right call to put myself. I knew the risks. I knew how to get out of the situation, and so it was the best call safety-wise.
And it sounds like, again, you're tailoring it to your strengths and your unique vision that you can bring to the table. So no, it's very inspiring to hear that. And I wanted to also ask you about previs, which, for anyone who doesn't know, shooting a test for, let's say, a fight scene to test the camera angles, framing and editing before shooting the real thing. And for Sam, how long do you typically spend on previs? And do you employ the same basic techniques and process from your shorts and even indie films of the past to these big productions today?
Yeah. Previs, fight viz, or concept videos are super important. It's a tool for filmmakers that I was fortunate enough to be a part of and learn its value and contribute in that aspect on movies. I started with 8711 and Dave Leach and Chet Stahelski, and they did a lot of that stuff. They pushed that. They didn't start it per se, but they perfected it. And I got to be a part of a lot of those from different ways, as a performer, as a choreographer, as then shooting and editing. And then for directors, like when I worked on the Hunger Games on Mockingjay with Francis Lawrence, he used fight viz, or stunt viz, he call it, as a way to prove what was possible physically, because they would do a true previs through the computer, and they would, the animatics for the whole thing, and the cameras would sometimes do these amazing shots, but he would look at it and go, I don't know if that's physically possible. Can you guys recreate this in real life and just make sure it's possible? And so we'd be like, yeah, sure. So we'd shoot all these action sequences in real life, and so that he could get a much more true sense of what was achievable. So it's a tool for filmmakers. I use it for whether I was second year directing or stunt coordinating or directing. I use it as a tool constantly. And it depends on what you're shooting, how long it's going to take. But usually we would say, and this is a rough generalization, but for 3 hours, you would get about, in the previous stage, not movie making, in the previous stage, you get about a usable minute of footage for every 3 hours that you do stuff. So if you've got but it depends. Like I've spent 4 days on a 1 minute fight sequence, because you're just trying to prove concepts, and you shoot it and you're like, that's not quite working, let's do it again. And that's the place to spend that time, because those 4 days spent getting that minute of footage, and then once you really break it down of what it takes, and now you've got all the angles that you think will work best, and you rehearse it and the actors know it. Now you can take those 4 days of previs and turn it into like 1 day of shooting or a half a day of shooting, because you've done all the hard work ahead of time and prepared. And so it's a very valuable tool for filmmakers.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next slide, please, guys. I've got another nice quote from Sam here about really goes back to the mechanics of filmmaking. And it's what you said, and I'll just read it out for anyone. It's vital to learn about the filmmaking process. It doesn't have to be film school necessarily, but you need to have an understanding of how films are made and how the process works. Get together with your friends and recreate cool fight scenes you like. Keep it simple and practice your choreography. Watch your favorite fight scenes and pay attention to the moves, reactions, and camera angles. And I think that's a really inspiring quote and reminder to keep that growth mentality, and that nobody comes to this ready-made. And Sam, is there anything that you'd like to add to that? Just words of encouragement for anybody embarking on perhaps their first short films?
Yeah, I mean, the filmmaking process is, it's trial and error a lot of times. And I think part of, the way I say how the process works, you can't really understand it, and you will not know what to do until you do it. Mm-hmm. And you can do it wrong. And that's why I mentioned earlier about mistakes. And sometimes those are the most valuable lessons, or when you do things incorrectly, or you learn that, there's a better way to do it, because you keep searching for the more effective route, the better, that's not why technology advances so quickly, is people are trying to find a better way. What's the better way to do this? And with films, it's like, what's the most effective way to tell this story? And so that's, everybody and that's the crazy thing about film, is you can give the same story to 5 different directors, and they'll tell it 5 completely different ways. Mm-hmm. And so that's why it's important to find your voice and keep learning as much as you can about the process. So if you're going to be a director, I advise people to work, before you start your journey, keep directing, because you're not trying to be the best as a director. You have to understand what it takes to be a costume designer, sound mixer, boom, like a cable, laying cables for electric. You got to understand what all that means. Doesn't mean you're trying to do that job, right? So I would say do as many jobs as you can, as many varied jobs. But then if you want to make films, make films. And technology today is incredible. Like this device I'm sitting out here, this phone can shoot 4K. You can shoot and edit a movie on your phone. People have done it. Mm-hmm. So it's when I was first starting, you had to have a certain amount of money, you had a certain amount of time, and had to know people who rent a camera, or you bribe them, say, hey, like, I'll help you wash your car if you let me use your camera for a day. So, but now the device that gets us through the day, that we're spending our time, connected to the social media or what have you, that device, you can tell a story. And so now there's really no reason not to. If that's what you want to do,
yeah,
there's an amazing technology right literally at your fingertips.
Yeah. Absolutely. And guys, we're going to dive into questions from the audience in just a moment. And I know we have had some good questions, but first I do just want to take the opportunity to give a huge thanks to Sam for taking the time out from his busy schedule to speak to us. And like everyone else, I cannot wait for Extraction 2. So stay tuned for that for sure. Please follow Sam on Instagram as well. He's been posting great stuff in the past. And I'm sure there'll be more soon as we get nearer to the release date. And I'll always look forward to seeing what Sam's working on next. And I'm on Instagram too, usually talking about films and action and all that good stuff, if you'd like to follow me. And we do want to say thanks again to the BFI and Action Xtreme for giving us this platform to connect with you guys, and hopefully you found this really useful. So we've had some good questions, Sam. I'm just going to take a look at a few of them.
What I would say, if you don't mind, just because I'm on my mobile device, if you can field some questions, pick some out and then ask me, I'm happy to answer.
I've got some questions for you now, Sam. That's fine. Okay. So one question asks, seeing as Extraction was based on a graphic novel, could you describe your creative process in adapting those action scenes from a graphic novel standpoint to the film, and whether you opted to remain faithful or take creative liberties in your approach?
Great question. Thanks for that. I took a lot of creative liberties because the graphic novel is the graphic novel, and I wasn't trying to make a live action graphic novel. I was trying to make a movie that was, my interpretation of those events. So it went from, I'd read the graphic novel. It's awesome. I think it was called Ciudad, actually. We changed the location, changed a number of things about it. And so then it's, say, you saw it, or you saw it in your mind when you read it, because you always have this mental imagery. And now the hard part is forget it. You read the script, and then, which is a new being, an entity altogether, and now start to feel what that is. And then, try to make those words come to life in your own mind. And like I said, with the action sequence we mentioned earlier, is that on the page, it was something very different altogether. And so then how do I take that and interpret it in a way that fits my vision, fits my style? And then with everything, what's the reality that I'm trying to create for audiences in this movie? And that's the difference, I think, between, or the challenge with movies and adapting, is you have to try to be true to the source material and yet make it your own. So I tried to focus as much as possible on making it my own, so that it was I was creating a reality for people that was different from the graphic novel.
Sure. We had an interesting question about women in film, and somebody's asked you, how many women do you know working in stunts and action directing, Sam? And do you have any specific advice for women wanting to break in?
That's a great question, great topic. I have always felt the sort of a lack of the female voice in the action world. It's always been very male dominated, unfortunately. It's just kind of the way it's been, but that's changing. Like, there are a lot of, and I've tried as much as possible in my career and time, whenever I have the opportunity to push for the female voice, I do. Like, I know, there were, for example, that trying to give just more female stunt coordinators. Like, I would say, hey, people go, hey, who's a great person to do this stunt coordinating job? And so I think of the best person, not the best man, not the best, like, who's the best person, and who would both know their stuff, and who would this opportunity benefit the most. And so I've given a lot of opportunities to women through the years, and then it's up to everyone, whoever gets the opportunity. Now it's up to you. I can open the door, you have to walk through it, and then take that room, as you will. But I think the advice is to just be good at what you do, whatever that is. And then hopefully the world is changing, and I believe it is, and I'm pushing for that, where you will be looked at as a filmmaker, not like labeled a female filmmaker or a Black filmmaker. You're a filmmaker. You have a point of view. You have a voice. Develop that voice to the point of being like an expert in whatever field that is, and then just speak your truth. And don't be afraid of rejection. Meaning, like, say, hey, as I said, why is my name not on that list? Lay the challenge out. Allow people the opportunity to change their minds. Say, hey, I have something to offer here. And hopefully, I see it changing. I see it happening. I know a number of women stunt coordinators, many female stunt performers, but now female action directors, which I think is amazing. And I would like to see more of that, because it's just every filmmaker has a different point of view, and the more specific points of view we have for these specific stories, I think the better the filmmaking community will be, and we'll all benefit from that. So speak your truth, get good at what you want to do, and then just go do it.
Sure. And this is quite a broad question, but somebody's asked, are there any camera angles or movements that you think are particularly good when filming fight scenes? And obviously, I guess that's also that's personal taste, but is there anything in particular that you'd lean to, or that you've seen that you've admired?
Yeah, I mean, it's the correct answer is whatever angle inspires you, and whatever angle is the best version to tell your story. Because, like I said, 5 different filmmakers could do an action scene in 5 different ways. There are certain ways I found that tend to be more effective than others. For example, as a general rule, it's often favorable to have action coming towards you because you feel it more. So, but I've also, if you do it correctly, action going away from you can be exciting. So it's really put the camera where it best tells the story that you're trying to tell.
Great, great. And aside from budget, this probably could lean to you as a filmmaker, but also a coordinator. Somebody's asked, aside from budget, what are the top qualities that would interest or excite you about working on a film and actually getting involved?
Top qualities about a film that would interest me. Story number one. Like I don't, I just get asked like, oh, what kind of movies do you want to make? What kind of genre are you looking at? It's like story number one. If there's a compelling story, I'd love to tell it on the moon. If there's a compelling story, we'll tell it, 2,000 leagues under the sea. It's all about story and character. And then, yes, I lean more towards the action genre because that's what I grew up admiring. And so I have an affinity for that. But if there's not a compelling story and a compelling character that I want to dive into, because as a filmmaker, I'm going to spend like a minimum of 1.5 years to 2 years of my life with this character and with this story. So if it doesn't inspire me, or have something that excites me that I want to tell, then it's not really worth the time.
Sure. And this is, again, it's a really, really subjective thing probably, but do you think, somebody asked a question about the length or the duration of an action scene. Is there a good or an ideal length to have your action scene?
We're dealing with that right now in our in our movie, because we have an action scene that is not a spoiler, but you guys can put 2 and 2 together, that might or might not be longer than a previous action scene we've done. So length becomes, to me, what's important about the duration of the scene is that it tells the story that you're looking to tell. And that can be, example, we did an 11-minute and 29-second oneer in the first movie that told the story that we were trying to tell of an extraction in real time. Mm-hmm. In Raiders, one of the Indiana Jones movies, and you might know better than me, but when the guy swings the swords and he shoots him, that action sequence takes, like, the action part of it takes about 10 seconds, 15 seconds, but it serves the purpose of the story. It's funny, we learn something about Indiana Jones, and it moves the character and the story along. So it could be 10 seconds, it can be 10 minutes. It's the appropriate length is whatever length it is or it takes to tell your story in a compelling way.
Sure. And we've had a question asking, when doing an action scene with a character who, in the context of the story, is not necessarily a skilled fighter or martial artist, how do you make the scene plausible without making the ability seem kind of out of character? Oh. Sam, can you hear us? Frozen for a moment. Hi, Sam. Did you hear the question?
Yep. I did. Sorry, I was starting to answer the question. I did.
Oh, sorry. It froze for a sec. Sorry.
No, it's all good. I'm glad. I wouldn't want to give all the goods away without you guys hearing it. That's a good question. I think that's a challenge because as action designers, our first kind of instinct is to do what's entertaining and visually exciting. And we kind of assume like, oh gosh, if everybody else in the story is throwing high kicks and doing spinning kicks, and there's a fight scene with this character who doesn't know that, I feel the pressure that they have to do that, because otherwise people will think it's boring. I would say stay true to your character, no matter what that fight is. And then, like I said earlier, sometimes there's amazing freedom within constraints. So if your character knows nothing, like what can I do with this? Can I make it funny? Can I make it, can I make it scary? Do I change the feeling of this scene? And now if I have someone who's really skilled going at someone who's not, how do they do that? Do I show that they're smarter than the other person? Do I show that is there something else they can do that is a different way of solving the problem? Because an action scene is really just a problem your character has to solve. In in a Jackie Chan movie or a Jason Statham movie, they solve it with their fists and their feet, but there are other ways to solve that problem if your character has different skills. And so that can be a very, very fun challenge.
Sure. And we've been asked as well, Sam, what's the toughest or the hardest action sequence that you've worked on in your career?
Oh, gosh, that is a tough question. But let's say we did, and I don't know if any of you all have seen this movie, but we did a movie called Wolf Warrior 2. And in that sequence, we did an underwater oneer. So where, it's this long, stitched together, of course, but that was a very challenging thing to do just logistically. How are you going to have all these actors and stunt people underwater for long periods of time? So how do you train them effectively? Because safety protocol, you don't want people getting hurt, because remember before, safety is paramount. So how do you do this safely and also make it look interesting? So that might have been one of the most challenging things that I've had to do yet.
Okay. Wow. Great. And just wanted to ask, this sounds like quite a specific piece of advice. Somebody's asked, how can you, just even in theory, thinking about this, how could you give a fast speed feeling to a motorcycle sequence in terms of camera angle and editing and lensing? Is there a way that you might cut between certain shots for a motorcycle?
You're saying trying to make a motorcycle chase seem fast?
Yes.
Well, I mean, the first and most obvious way is to go fast, but unless you can, like, if you're, I think where it's coming from is, you don't have the space or room or skilled riders or something like that. But then if you can move the motorcycle, then you can do that with frame rate. You could drop the frame rate down to 22 frames, 21, 18 frames to make it seem like it's going faster. You just got to be aware of other actions so it doesn't look cartoonish. A lot of times what people will do is add some shake to the camera. Like if I'm, if you want to see if this punch doesn't look so fast here, I do like this, and now it looks faster. There's ways to so in camera tricks. There's also post tricks where you can drop frames. Sometimes the speed of editing can speed up your your vehicle, so you can go, rather than just getting one or two angles, again, time and money, I don't know what you have, but you can try to get 6 or 7 angles. So now you can, you can cut from here to there, close up on the wheel, you can, and close up on the throttle. There's a lot of ways that you can cheat speed. But I would, to answer that fully and a better answer, I would kind of need to know what's your end goal and what are you working with. But those are some tricks that come to mind.
Sure. I think we've got time for one more question, Sam. And somebody's asked, at what point in your career did you actually decide that you were going to direct? Now, obviously, we talked about you've made short films and so on. Was the seed planted back then, or was there an actual catalyst moment that changed? I
think that there's 2 parts of an answer to that question. The seed was planted very early. Like I knew that I was a director when I was directing short films.
Yeah.
So, and I knew just with that feeling that this wasn't over. I was going to take that somewhere else. But then, you get off into stunts and you do some acting and things that take you away from that as a number one focus. But I think when I started wanting to second unit direct, so it was probably around, and truthfully, it comes from a place of, and a lot of us go through that from the action side, at least people I've spoken to who've been in the action genre and designing action and choreographing and whatnot, who then go on to direct movies, is there's a little bit of frustration with execution of action is how you see it. So you'll put all this time, energy, and you shoot the fight biz, you'll put all this time and effort, and you'll say, this is going to look amazing. You'll go away because your job is done. You go to another movie, 2 or 3, you come back, you watch the movie in theaters, and you go, what the bleep was that? You're like, that's not at all you butchered my action. And so there's a bit of, maybe it's ego, where you say, you know what, I want people to see what I think this should look like. So then you kind of work, all right, that's my goal. I want to get there. So it's probably seeing action sequences that were designed by me frustratingly butchered up on the screen for different reasons. And then going, you know what, I'm tired of that. I'm tired of that feeling. I want to direct a movie. So that was probably around 2014 or 15 when it became a goal of like, all right, let's find scripts, let's write these scripts. It's like, let's get that. And then, then you start speaking that truth out and you say like, I want to direct. And now you start sharing that. And then, and it was only a couple years later that I was fortuitous enough to have that script for Extraction brought to me and said, hey, get her done.
And actually, I see one more, and I do just want to make quick time for this, is what's Chris Hemsworth work with?
That's a great closing question. Chris Hemsworth is an absolute gem of a human being. He's kind, he's hardworking, he's funny. He's everything you think he should be when you see him up on screen. And I would work with him 8 days a week and twice on that 8th day. Like he's incredible. And we, not only as a human being and a collaborator, but he's a great friend. He's a good guy. and I couldn't ask for a better filmmaking partner. The guy is amazing.
Yeah, that's great. And of course, we look forward to seeing what you guys cook up next in Extraction 2. And thank you again so much, Sam, for taking the time out. I know you've been super busy in post-production, but we're super grateful that you've resurfaced and you've taken some time to speak to us. So we really appreciate it and wish you all the best with the film. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Mike, and I appreciate what you do. And so I hope everyone is appreciative of what Mike does, bringing these kinds of events together and just kind of reporting on action in cinema. It's very important. It's something that's near and dear to my heart. So hats off to you, Mike, and thank all of you who showed up and for the great questions. Hopefully it was helpful, and best of luck in all your endeavors.
Thank you so much, Sam.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you so much, Sam. And thank you everyone in the audience for your insightful questions. They were really, really great. I'm sorry we're not able to get through all of them. But just before you go, I wanted to tell you about a couple of things that we're planning or have going on. First thing is surveys. If I can ask, if you have 2 minutes to complete our surveys and let us know what you thought of today's event, what you thought of Sam's advice, Mike's hosting, please let us know. We're trying to improve our online events. That would be really helpful. In terms of our next lab, it will take place in September, and it will actually be our first in-person event for this season of labs. It will focus on working with the archives, so something quite different to today's session, researching content and finding inspiration from archive materials to inform your filmmaking practices. It will be conducted by the BFI Special Collections team. And then following this talk, there'll be a special guided tour through selected treasures from the BFI National Archives Special Collections. And that will be followed up by networking drinks at the BFI South Bank. So the event takes place on Saturday, the 10th of September at the BFI South Bank in London, for those of you who are in London, and tickets will go on sale this Wednesday. So keep an eye out on the BFI Film Academy social media channels to find out when they're on sale, and hopefully we'll see you there and we can finally all meet in person and you can meet each other in person. We also have our submissions for Future Film Festival. They're open at the moment. They close in September, so you have just a month to submit your short films for us to us and be in the running for Future Film Festival 2023, which takes place in February next year. I think that's it that we have planned for now. We also opened our accreditations for LFF today. So take a look again at our social media profiles to find more about that. But yes, we'll be conducting a great program of events, Film Academy events at LFF, and hope to see some of you there in person or digitally. There will be both. As I said at the beginning, the session today was recorded. So if you want to watch it again, if you've missed anything, it will be uploaded to our BFI YouTube channel later on this week, and we'll let you know when it's up. Thank you so much all. Have a lovely evening and see you in September.